Hello everyone and welcome to our Robocall Mitigation webinar today. My name is Lance McCall, Senior Marketing Communications Specialist here at Ribbon, and I'm joined today by Jamie Gibson on your screen, Ribbon's VP of Technology and Sales Engineering. We also have Bridget Alexander, Staff Director for Business Development with JSI, along with Elizabeth Page, Ribbon's U.S. Rural Market Sales Director, as well as Dan Teekman, Ribbon's Director of Solutions Marketing. So thanks to all of you for being on with us and presenting today on robocall mitigation and some of the FCC regulations that we all need to be aware of. Before we get started, I wanted to point out the Ask a Question box. You should see it at the bottom right of your screen. If you don't see it, you'll see a question mark. You can click that question mark and it should expand out so you can see it. But at the bottom right, please ask us any questions you may have throughout the presentation today. We love hearing from you and would love to interact with you with those questions and get your questions answered. Also on the right side of your screen, you should see a little document icon. If you click that, you'll see a few documents we've added for you to take with you today. So we'll mention them again towards the end, but feel free to download those as well at your convenience. All right, I'll be back towards the end. We'll do a little Q&A, but for now I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Bridget, who will get us started. Bridget.
Thank you, Lance. Good morning, everyone. As Lance stated, I'm Bridget Alexander White with JSI. I will review the robocall mitigation rules, update on the rules per the FCC's most recent orders. Next slide, please. So how we ended up here, I'd like to start with how we got where we are in the robocall relief efforts. It all started with the Telephone Robocall Abuse Criminal Enforcement and Deterrence Act, which we all call in the industry the Traceback Act, which was passed in 2019. Now, the Act includes a variety of robocall mitigation efforts that the industry must implement, and to make sure this occurs, the FCC has issued mandates to enforce the Traceback Act. Next slide, please. The robocall mitigation orders, there are two main orders that I will focus on today. And the one of the most important in the industry immediately is the Call Authentication Trust Anchor Second Reporting Order. It was actually adopted in October of last year, and that is the order that states two very specific things. One is that service providers must implement stir, shake, and caller ID authentication in their networks by June 30th of 2021. However, if you are a small service provider under the FCC's rule or definition of 100,000 or fewer voice service subscriber lines, you will have until June 30th of 2023 to implement stir shaken into your network. So that means you have until that time frame, a little breathing room to make sure that your network's able to authenticate and verify calls that are valid, and make sure your customers know when their phone rings that the number and name that are showing on their device is likely to be accurate. Next slide, please. The next order is the Advanced Methods to Target and Eliminate Unlawful Robocalls, the fourth reporting order. This order was adopted in December of 2020. Now, this one has been a little forgotten within the industry because of the robocall mitigation order from October, the one that we're going to focus on the most today, at least from my perspective. So this one kind of fell off the back end a little bit. Now, this order has some requirements for all service providers. Every single service provider by May 6th is required to, number one, respond to traceback requests from the Commission, civil and criminal law enforcement agencies, and the Traceback Consortium, which is U.S. Telecom. Now, the requirement is to make sure that the Commission and law enforcement have any and all information they need to combat illegal robocalling as thoroughly as possible. The other item in this order that is effective May 6th is that all service providers should have in place measures internally to try and prevent new and renewing customers from using their network to originate illegal calls. Now, this is not saying that the FCC is saying that, okay, by May 6th, you need to have your robocall mitigation program, which I'll touch on shortly, reported into the new RMP portal. That is not what this is saying. There's a totally separate date for that. This order is stating that you need to have the processes and procedures in place to try and police the new and renewing customers. So have it ready within your network. May 6th, you should be able to enforce these measures, and then we'll move on to when you need to report that to the FCC. Next slide, please. So what's the difference between those two orders? The October order does allow for the extension for small providers until June 30th of 2023. And it requires those carriers during that time frame not to sit back and get comfortable, sip tea and have a good time outside. You all have to do one very important thing, and that is you have to have a robocall mitigation program in place that can reasonably stop or halt the origination of illegal robocall traffic on your network. That is a requirement, regardless of the size of your company. You have to implement an RMP and be able to certify that to the FCC in their new portal. Now, the December order, again, carries a May 6th effective date for 2021, and you have to implement measures within your network to police your network against new and renewing customers from using it to originate illegal calls. Those are the differences between the October and the December order. Next slide, please. So let's focus a little bit of our time on the Robocall Mitigation Program that you all must implement under the October 2020 order. So the RMP has to combat the origination of illegal robocalls on your network. And origination is the key word here. And my personal thought on why the FCC has focused on the origination as opposed to the termination is because I think their thought process is if you are policing your network and making sure that your customers are not originating illegal robocall traffic, or making sure as much as possible, that will help stem it on the terminating side as well. So they are making all of the local service providers responsible for their end users. Under the extension, again, other than implementing that RMP, you have to comply with it. The FCC is not stating, oh, just simply file in the portal that you have a contract with Ribbon for them to assist with robocall mitigation traffic originating on your network. You can't just put that sentence in there and move on with life. You have to tell the FCC that you are following through with investigating. Once those calls are identified, how are you going to investigate and determine, is it truly an illegal robocall campaign, or is it a legitimate call that just happened to fall under the analytics of looking like such a campaign of robocall? The others to commit, again, commit to Traceback. That is very important to the FCC. As you can see, they've mandated that in multiple orders. They want companies to commit to responding to those Traceback requests and letting the U.S. telecom rep that reaches out to you, tell them that you've investigated and yes or no, this call is suspicious, and how you're going to deal with that traffic. And lastly, certify. You have to certify to the Robocall Mitigation Program that you implement in the FCC's RMP database. Next slide, please. So what are your filing requirements? And we finally received a public notice from the FCC that defined what companies have to do in regards to your RMP on the from the filing standpoint. Your certification of your RMP, your company identification, your company name, address, and contact information for robocall mitigation must be submitted via the FCC's Robocall Mitigation Database portal on or before June 30th of this year. If you have your RMP in place and you are ready to submit that to the FCC, feel free to move forward and submit your RMP. Second, you will need a commission registration system or CORS account and an FCC registration number, FRN, in order to submit a certification. So my recommendation there would be find out who internally manages your CORS account with the FCC. So if you have to make payments to the FCC, The person that manages that should have access and be able to log in and move forward with submitting your RMP. Next slide, please. My favorite question that I've received so far, I have to say, during all of this, the Traceback and all the orders the FCC has issued is, well, what if I don't do it? That's one thing. What if I don't? Or I don't think I have to. Well, on both of those points, the answer is the same. Now, number one, you have to do it. Every carrier has to have an RMP certification in the FCC's database. If you do not, effective September 28th of this year, all intermediate and terminated voice service providers will be prohibited from accepting voice traffic directly from your company if you are not listed in the RMP database. There is no gray area here. The FCC's order was very, very clear. The language is very clear. If you are not listed in the database, your traffic will be interrupted. And there could potentially be more FCC enforcement actions that will be levied against your company as well. Next slide, please. So that is all I have in regards to the orders. Hopefully that you all found that very beneficial. And Lance, I believe we have a polling question.
We sure do. Thanks, Bridget. Quick poll question here. Do you have an originating robocall mitigation program in place? Your choices there, as you can see on screen, are yes, I have fully implemented a solution already. The second choice, no, but I'm evaluating solutions now. Or the third option, which we've heard a little bit, is no, I don't believe I need a solution. So let us know your thoughts there, and we'll just wait a couple minutes here to get some responses in. I see them trickling in now. So while everyone's answering the poll question, I just want to remind everyone we do have a couple handouts for you to take. Again, on the right side of your screen, the little document icon, you can click that and get we have a stir, shake, and checklist. We also have a new document on FCC rulings and the ribbon implementation, a little brief there to take as well. And last but not least, bottom right of your screen, ask us a question. I know there's probably plenty of questions. We have the utmost experts on the call today, so take advantage of that and please ask your questions below. So Jamie, Bridget, Dan, Elizabeth, everybody on the call, we've got about 60% of the folks have voted. Any revelations you see there in the results, or you want to speak to any of that?
Well, we're getting some interesting things. 4% don't believe they need a solution. So, Bridget, hopefully after we complete this webinar, we can convince them that they do have to have something in place. You know, a solution and a plan mean a lot of different things to different people, and we'll talk about what those options are. The good news is about 10% of the people have implemented something. The challenge is about 87% are saying they are evaluating solutions and need to. So we, as an industry, have a lot of work to do over the next couple months, Lance.
Agree. Well, I think we've got all the votes we're going to get there. Good results. Thank you for participating in that, and we'll pass things off, I believe, to Jamie now. Jamie?
Jamie, real quick before you start, there's a question for Bridget I think she can answer.
Okay.
Is an outside consulting agency allowed to have a CORS account for their client?
To my knowledge, the service providers themselves have to have the CORS account. An outside consulting agency will likely be able to log in on behalf of your company and submit that information.
Thanks. All right, Jamie, all yours.
Okay. So going back to what Bridget talked about and drilling down in a little more detail on this last FCC order that we got that comes in effect in May, has really caused quite a stir. And really there's some immediate requirements for all service providers, as Bridget mentioned, responding to Traceback, taking steps to mitigate illegal traffic, and affirmative, effective measures to combat illegal calls. There was also some language in there around the terminating side and blocking calls and who can under what circumstance. But really what we're going to focus on today and kind of an outline for the rest of the presentation is how do you comply to these requirements using the ribbon portfolio in your network. So first I want to talk about Traceback. I get asked this quite often, what is a Traceback request? I mean, Traceback requests are really used to identify who are the bad actors in the network and where's the traffic coming from. And the challenge happens like this. So a call comes in from this service provider Z to Bob Smith, and he gets this illegal robocall, and they've been bothering him a lot. Eventually, he reports that robocall to law enforcement, comes back to the Traceback consortium, and at some point, they decide to issue a Traceback request. The whole purpose of this request is to find out where in the network this call originated. Sometimes it's easy to figure out, but quite often when calls go through multiple providers, as we're showing in this network, it can be quite difficult. Often this first service provider has to dig through CDRs or other call records they have in their network to figure out where they got the call from and pass that Traceback request on to the previous provider in the call chain. Other providers do that same process until finally they figure out that this call originated on service provider's A network and they can find the bad actor. Obviously, the challenge we've had in the industry lately, or over the past couple of years, is this process can take months to happen. In the past, it could even take up to a year to do a Traceback request. So with this legislation and the mandate, they're saying you have to comply in a timely manner, and they're trying to get this Traceback faster, because what happens is these bad actors often are moving locations. They're not in the same physical address. They'll rent a space, and by the time you figure out where they're at, they've moved on. So how do you prepare for a Traceback request? Well, if you have a C15, the best way to do that is to add the call history server to your C15. I know a lot of our customers have this already because it was introduced back in release 10. There's a lot of benefits that the history server has around traffic reporting and troubleshooting across the network. But one of the big things it does is it stores exactly that, the call history, the CDRs, and the call flows for everything that's happened in your network for, as long as you want to store that. A technician can simply connect into that call history server, pull Wireshark traces or CDR files, and view the history of what's happened to the network, so you'll know where that call originated or what service provider you got that call from during a Traceback request. If you have our C20 or our voice sync platform, or even a third-party soft switch like Metaswitch, one of the benefits, one of the solutions there is to add Ribbon Analytics. Again, Ribbon Analytics is a comprehensive solution for monitoring and managing your network, detecting anomalies that go on. There's a lot of applications that can be added to analytics, such as fraud control and some robocalling control applications as part of our Call Trust solution. But one of the other big things it does is it's a big data lake for ingesting all of the CDRs for the traffic across your network, and allows you to store and search that information, pull up call flow ladder diagrams, and again, figure out where the call came from on your network when a Traceback request comes in. Now, there are other tools. If you want to save CDRs into a database, you can do that, but manually searching that information can be quite time consuming if you don't have a good tool for doing that. Okay, so the other part of that requirement that the FCC issued was if you are notified by this Traceback consortium that your customer is originating illegal traffic, you have to take action. So what do you do there? Well, obviously you're going to work with the state and local, national law enforcement agencies that are involved, notify the customer that they're generating illegal traffic, and if they continue to do so and don't stop, then you disconnect service from them. Probably the hardest part in all of this is the requirement to prevent customers from originating these illegal calls. And there's a couple things that you as a service provider can do for this. Probably the most obvious is to know your customer. When somebody signs up for service, make sure that they have a valid tax ID number, that they have an address, that they're not buying service with a stolen credit card, things like that. And secondly, and this probably requires some changes, is modify your contract language with that customer that prohibits all forms of mass calling with a right to disconnect service if they violate that clause. For customers that do want to generate mass calling, do a little more due diligence on that. Provide a little more background check on the company, make sure that they're legitimate. Set up rate limits. How many calls are they going to be allowed to generate? What DID ranges are they going to be allowed to use? And things like that. So establish that in the contract. And then finally, subscribe to Ribbon Call Trust for policing those outbound calls. This solution will allow or will block known illegal callers, numbers that are on the do not originate list, unallocated numbers or invalid numbers. It also reports the call volume, which helps you meet that requirement for the FCC to track outbound call volume to determine if somebody's crossed these thresholds. And then the solution is an easy change to support STIR/SHAKEN when you're ready and you have SIP interconnect. So really the rest of this presentation, we're going to talk about this last bullet and how this can be implemented in your network. But first, I just want to do a quick little hypothetical quiz, because sometimes I think people get this information wrong. And the first question to ask yourself is, are robocalls illegal? We talk about robocalling and the problems that we have quite often. And the answer to this is no, robocalls are not illegal. The second question we get asked a lot is about spoofing. And, spoofing is illegal. No, spoofing is not illegal. There's a lot of very legitimate reasons to do spoofing. There's even a lot of legitimate reasons to do spoofing with robocalls. A lot of times a call center will make phone calls on behalf of a doctor's office or CVS pharmacy to let you know a prescription's ready. Perfectly legitimate reason to spoof a number and generate a robocall. Really, it's all about intent. And if the caller's intent is to defraud or cause harm to you, that's when it makes it unlawful. And this comes to us from the Truth in Caller ID Act. So the focus area that the FCC is really worried about when they're talking about taking or making plans to mitigate illegal robocalls, they're really talking about these robocallers that have some type of malicious intent, whether or not they spoof the phone number. So why does this matter? Well, you can't just block all robocalls on your network. Secondly, you can't just block all spoofing on your network because a lot of that is legitimate. You really need to have a more sophisticated and nuanced approach to take a look at and help you determine if the callers really have a bad intent. And so to do that, both for originating traffic on your network as well as terminating traffic on your network, there's a couple key things that you need to look at. First, you have to understand the identity of who is making the phone call. Second, what is the reputation of that caller? What has that number done historically? And then third, where did the call originate on your network, or where did it come into your network? Same call appearing on a local interface versus an interconnect interface has a much different meaning in your network. And then finally, you need to be able to monitor and detect anomalies. So when a particular call is being looked at, does that fit that normal behavior, or has something changed for that particular call that makes you want to question it? So we look at that in a little more detail. So identity is probably the easiest one to determine. Obviously, if they're one of your own subscribers and you own the number and have issued it to them, yeah, you could trust that call and you can understand the identity and be confident in that. On the other hand, if a number is listed as an unassigned or a does not originate number, that's never going to be valid. You should never see that on your network. Same thing if it's an invalid phone number, those numbers are never valid to make phone calls. And then we spent a lot of time over the last couple of years talking about STIR/SHAKEN. STIR/SHAKEN, when you receive a call and the number's been attested to, that certainly helps you trust the identity of the caller. But the thing that it doesn't do is tell you, why the person is calling. And you need two other pieces to help figure that out. So first, analytics, whether it's in your own network or using Ribbon Analytics. This is all about learning normal behaviors in the network and then being able to detect an anomaly. Does this caller normally generate 5 calls a day and now it's 5,000 calls a day? Or do they normally use, one type of device and now they switch to a different type of device? Second thing is third-party database and analytics sources. whether they're created by you or crowdsourcing. These can all identify known bad actors so that you can react to them. And then we talked about the trust context. This is all about understanding where it comes on your network. If it's on your own network, a trunk between two switches, you could probably trust that. If you see that call enter on a peering interface, it might have a spoof number. And certainly if you see a call coming in on maybe like a toll interface from a long distance carrier, and the originating number is one that belongs to you, most likely that call has been spoofed. So when we put all of that together into Ribbon's Call Trust solution, it provides really a comprehensive solution for originating and terminating robocall mitigation, both for TDM networks when you have ISIP trunking, as well as IP networks. If you look on the left, in your service provider network, maybe you have a C15, maybe you have our voice sync platform or our C20, or you have our T7000, an SBC might be in your network, or really any third-party soft switch or even a hosted service that you're subscribing to. All of these platforms can benefit from Call Trust simply by sending the call information up to the Identity Hub platform, and this can occur either as an API interface or quite often just a SIP invite, so just a SIP connection up to Identity Hub, and you'll get the response back either to continue or block the call, or if you're leveraging our API, we can provide actual robo and fraud scores and let you determine in your network what to do with that call. Also, we talked about the analytics platform that can gather call data that's going on in your network in near real time and provide updated information to Identity Hub to augment that service, so that now it's not only taking what's going on based on national data and other service providers' data, but it's complementing that with what's going on in your network. So again, same solution, incoming and outgoing for both SIP and TDM call types. So let's take a look at a couple different examples. Very simple example here, simple C15 customer that only has TDM interconnects. So in this case, Mary Jane was making a phone call to Bob Smith, and you see the call comes into the C15. We set up a SIP trunk group to Identity Hub, and we route that call, or we just send the SIP invite up to Identity Hub. And in this case, Identity Hub is responding with a 480, which says the call, the address is temporarily moved, but it's a good call. And then the C15 knows to route advance to an ISIP trunk and continue that call to Bob Smith. So this is a call flow for a good caller. And again, I'm showing this example with the C15, but this could really be any third-party soft switch or SBC or even a hosted platform that has this capability of sending the SIP invite to Identity Hub and reacting on that response to advance to the next trunk group. Okay, let's look at a bad example. In this case, the service provider has our new voice sync platform. The call comes in to the service provider. In this case, the voice sync platform does that SIP invite to Identity Hub. Identity Hub determines that this has been an illegally spoofed number because it's the IRS number, which never originates calls. And it responds in this case with a 608, which is a network rejected response. And the platform knows to voice that or send that call to treatment and not complete the call. So again, two examples of letting good calls through and known calls bad. Our known bad callers automatically get blocked. Okay, so this is a key part of that FCC requirement so that you're not originating illegally spoofed calls onto the network. Okay, when it comes to the traffic monitoring and detecting robocalling, really you don't want to automatically be blocking traffic based on volumes because we talked about that. Robocalling is not illegal, but you want to understand what's going on. So here's a simple report I put together from some data from our from the Identity Hub platform. Shows the typical weekly pattern of callers for both the enterprises and some SMB customers. As you would expect, the enterprises have more traffic during the week, and it drops off on the weekends. Residential and SMB top callers tend to blend a little bit closer together and also be a little more even across weekdays and the weekends. But if you see on this particular Sunday towards the end of March, on the, I think it was the 25th here, clear anomaly, right? One of your SMB customers that typically has a very small amount of traffic has suddenly generated, more than 300 calls in that particular day. So this is obviously something you need to look into. You don't know if it was robocalling that they decided to do a robocalling campaign that day. More likely, it's fraud. Somebody hacked that customer's PBX and is generating traffic out of that PBX. In any case, you use this reporting to understand there's an anomaly, and you can investigate that traffic to figure out what's going on. And again, it's precisely this plan of understanding what's going on in your network and taking steps to mitigate or understand what's going on that meets that requirement of the FCC to have plans to mitigate illegal traffic. For customers that want a little more advanced diagnosis of what's going on in their network, when you add Ribbon Analytics to the Call Trust solution, you can get a lot more granular on what's going on in your network. So for example, here I took this traffic off of one of our tier 1 customers that has a lot of calls in their network. And you can see on the left graph, this is the top DIDs generating calls along with the completion rate. And you can see that red bar is calls that did not complete. So we have a very high volume of calls with a low completion rate. The next graph is showing the average call duration of calls that number originates, and a very short average call duration. When you put those two things together, most likely this is a robocaller. They're generating a lot of calls, people aren't answering them. So that's a number that you want to investigate. The analytics platform then allows you to drill down into a lot of other things, such as what were the top destinations being called. If suddenly you see a lot of callers across your network, not a lot of volume, but a lot of callers all of a sudden generating, dialing, this high-cost destination number, well, your network's probably being hit by a Wingiri attack. Now, you don't need to look at only the graphs to determine that. The system can automatically detect that and help you mitigate it, but certainly visually being able to look at it helps. Okay, to wrap up, service providers definitely need to take action to comply with that FCC mandate. There were 3 key requirements that you have to meet by the May 6th. You have to be prepared to respond to traceback requests. You have to mitigate that illegal traffic when you're notified that your network is generating it. And then finally, you have to take reasonable steps to avoid originating that bad traffic. And those reasonable steps include knowing your customer, having contract language, and having some way to monitor what's going on in your network, detecting those high traffic volumes so you could investigate what's going on. The FCC has not been overly prescriptive on what steps you have to take or what you must do, but you certainly can't take draconian steps like blocking all robocalling or blocking all spoofing. You really need to have a much more nuanced approach to that. Finally, you can meet the FCC requirements by adding Ribbon Call Trust to the solution. It supports the outbound robocall mitigation, which is the immediate concern, but also supports the inbound mitigation so that your customers aren't being hit by illegal or even just unwanted calls. And then it applies across to your TDM and IP trunking interfaces. So if you're a soft switch today with all TDM interconnect, no problem. We could do robocall mitigation for originating and terminating. And then when you add that SIP interface to connect with peers, we can add that stir shaking component and continue with the robocall mitigation as well. So finally, some contact information. Feel free to reach out to myself. My email and phone number are up there. Also, Elizabeth Page, reach out to her. Her email and phone number are out there as well. Or you could reach out to your account manager or SE directly to get information. Glad to help you and glad to help you work through anything you need to get the filing done. So Dan, I know we wanted to leave it for some questions. I'm not sure if you were able to answer them, or how we are there for us.
So we have a lot of good questions actually, and Bridget's joined back on as by video, which is great because we're going to ask her a handful of questions, and then Jamie, there'll be some more for you. So the first question, Bridget, is as an intermediate carrier, are we obligated to confirm RMP for the ILEX or CLEX that we receive traffic from?
Well, yes, because remember that September 28th date in which as an intermediate and terminating carrier, you will not be able to accept that traffic from companies that are not in the RMP. You'll need to verify that they are listed so that you'll know you can continue to accept their traffic.
Okay. Second question, are there any different reporting requirements for PSTN carriers?
No, this is equal opportunity reporting. Everybody has to be in the RMP database. No one's exempt.
Will JSI be available to prepare a template for companies needing to file their RMP to the FCC?
We can help you with the information that's required. Feel free to reach out to me. I'm very happy to go through the narrative with you and help you go through the database or the portal to file your RMP.
And that is the 3 additional questions we have for you. If any come in the next 12 minutes or so, maybe 20 minutes, we'll ask. So Jamie, let me turn and ask you a couple questions. Actually, let's start with this one. And I think you actually covered it, but we'll let you go back through it. How can I help a legitimate customer with a high call volume whose number is showing on caller IDs as potential spam or spam risk?
So that's a good question. So one of the things that the FCC added in their order allowing terminating providers to mark or even block traffic, there's 2 things coming back. One, they at the end of the year are going to have to respond back with a 608 or 607 to indicate that the call was blocked and did not complete because of either a network action or an end user action saying they didn't want to receive the call. So first, the outbound caller is going to know why those calls didn't complete, and it could be just because it was marked as spam. Secondly, the terminating provider and the analytics or the database that they're using to identify that call, certainly if they're blocking, but even if they're marking, should publish, and I think all of the large ones have, a kind of a number to register a complaint to saying my call is being inappropriately marked as spam. And I'll tell you, a very good example just happened to me. Somebody ran into my daughter's car. I still actually own the car. It was his fault, so their insurance company called me to work out the claim. When they called me, it showed up as spam, and so I didn't answer it. And I had to listen to the voicemail and realize I had missed a call from the insurance company. So it happens from very valid callers, and it needs to be addressed. The way to address that is to call the terminating provider, ask them for who they're using in their analytics databases that's marking that call. It's not super easy because you have to go to multiple providers if your calls are getting marked in multiple destinations as spam.
Okay, so Jamie, I think this one's answered for you. What happens if you have trunking customers that use our DIDs but place outbound calls using those DIDs, but they're placing them via other carriers? So the law enforcement request would arrive to us rather than the carrier that is actually facilitating or enabling these outbound calls.
Okay. I'm not sure I understood the question, Dan, but let me restate it. So if you're receiving a call on your network with DIDs that were issued by another carrier?
The other carrier is using my DIDs to place outbound calls.
Okay.
And Jamie, I think they're asking about maybe the traceback request, and as opposed to it originating through U.S. Telecom, it is actually coming through a law enforcement agency, which we've had some instances of that with our clients before. FBI agents have reached out directly with some questions, etc. So I think that's what the question is, and the answer I would say is that you would still respond. Just because the complaint or question about the traffic does not originate from U.S. Telecom only or a law enforcement agency, FCC or FTC, doesn't mean you don't have to respond. I've worked as the intermediate or liaison between companies in the past with such traceback requests.
Yeah.
I think that was the question.
Okay. Yeah, and that it gets complicated for sure, particularly when carriers wholesale numbers out to other ones and the traffic actually originates on a different network even though it belongs to them. Yep.
All right. What type of translation changes other than sending to the SIP trunk for Identity Hub are required? Would we need to build a new route for each of our current routes to send to the Identity Hub for reputation scoring first and then back out to the original route?
Okay. So no, you can set up a primary route for all calls to route out the same SIP trunk to Identity Hub and then route advance to the normal route for your existing connections. Note that the connection from your soft switch to the Identity Hub cloud, you want to be secure. So if you have an SBC and you could run it through TLS, that's one way of securing the connection. If you're going to go directly from your soft switch to Identity Hub, you're going to want to put a VPN router or something on that connection because you certainly don't want to send a whole bunch of unencrypted SIP invites across the internet up to Identity Hub, right? So there's some work to add some type of VPN or run it through a TLS connection or something like that to get up there. But other than that, it's just a simple trunk route.
So a question came in, I think we've collectively answered it, which is JSI or Ribbon going to help companies prepare their RMPs? The answer is that Ribbon will not be doing that, and JSI can provide you with consulting services to assist in that. But there's a follow-up question related to that that says, for the May 6th deadline, what do we need to do to verify that we are compliant? So I assume, Bridget, you can answer that.
Yeah, and actually, Dan, let me go back to your last question. While we are certainly not in the position of helping customers fill those the RMPs out and would look to somebody like JSI to do that, I believe we have a handout that we published here as part of this webinar that lists how you can be compliant with our products. And so if you're filling out your own RMP, we have information in there around how CallTrust enables it, what version of the C15 or the C20 you need to be on. So a lot of good information for you to reference as you're building that. But certainly, as it comes to actually doing it, we don't provide the legal advice or that we look to partners like JSI to do that for us. Your second question, Dan, can you repeat that?
I think this is for Bridget. For the May 6th deadline, what do we need to do to verify that we are compliant?
I think that question's in regards to making sure that they have processes and procedures in place to police their new and renewing customers. When I read through the order, the FCC did not list a certain type of compliance. Again, my interpretation of that is that you need to have those procedures in place, and when you file your RMP by or before June 30th, you will list those processes and procedures that you have for your new and renewing customers as part of your RMP. But I would say just have it on hand in your back pocket. Go ahead and start completing or constructing your narratives that you are going to use to submit to the RMP to define your program that you have in place.
Bridget, as we keep talking here, there's more questions coming in for you.
Okay.
The first one I think we've already answered, but I think it bears repeating, right? If we are already fully stir-shaken enabled, do we need to file the RMP?
According to the order, yes, you will need to log into the RMP portal, and there's an option. You'll have three options, and option 1 states that you have complete stir-shaken. When you select that option, you'll continue through the database and file the other required information and submit, And at that point, you have completed your RMP and carriers will not start blocking traffic in September. So you do have to notify the FCC that you've completed stir shaken.
Does the extension for all providers below 100,000 customers apply to the May 6th deadline? To which deadlines is the extension applicable?
The May 6th deadline, in reference to having the procedures in place to police your new and renewing customers, there is not an extension time frame listed. That applies to all carriers, and that's the date that the FCC has set. Again, there was not a reporting requirement or process listed in the order for the May 6th date, but you have to have that process in place. So again, I would say go ahead and start getting that together. And as Jamie referenced, a lot of that you all may already have in regards to if your new customers have to sign agreements, service agreements or contracts, the terms in there should hopefully make you in compliance with that May 6th order.
So again, I think, again, we've answered this, but I want to, I think all of these, if the questions are coming in, I do think it's important we make sure we're clear. When do I need to have the program in effect if I only have 50,000 customers? And I believe that would be May 6th, as we continue to say, that you need to have a program in place and file in the RMP by the end of June. Correct?
By May 6th, you have to have procedures in place for your new and renewing customers to try and alleviate the chances of them originating illegal robocalls. And then by or before June 30th, you need to submit your robocall mitigation plan in the FCC's portal. Now that buyer before June 30th means if you're ready right now today, you can go out, log in, and submit your RMP to the FCC now.
And again, I think this is ultimately a request for consulting. It's what types of information does the RMP need to include and what will actually be filed with the FCC? Is it extreme detail or just high level?
It's actually pretty easy. It looks like it's user-friendly. I haven't been able to go through and submit a full RMP, but the guide that the FCC provided shows, again, you need the CORS username and password, you need the CORS account, your FRN. You'll need to provide a detailed summary of your RMP, and one particular thing that the FCC noted, it has to be uploaded in a searchable PDF into the system, and you have to have a person, actual person that you list as your robocall mitigation contact. It wouldn't be robocall@ribbon.com. It has to be a person, the name, title, phone number, email address. So those are the things that you'll need to have ready. And then the options are you've implemented, complete stir shaken. Option 2 is partial stir shaken and robocall mitigation program is in effect. And the third option is no stir shaken, but you have an RMP in place.
Okay. Let's see. So there's a question, Jamie. I've been told we have to have a certificate with iConnective or Neustar by June 30th, 2021 for the robocall mitigation. Is this correct?
That is not correct. No, the certificate only applies to stir shaken. And if you are implementing stir shaken, you will need to have a certificate from a certificate authority, and there are several that you can get that from. That certificate gets placed if you're subscribing to the Ribbon Stir Shaken solution in our Identity Hub platform or our on-premise STI platform. If you're not doing stir shaken for robocall mitigation, you don't need that certificate. You just need to have your plan in place.
All right. Continuing to go through these. So there's a question here, Jamie, that goes into questions about out-of-band solutions. And so let me just read this and see if we can make sense of this.
Okay.
Has this changed any as far as a defined standard by ADIS or IETF on a TDM solution? The vendor proposing the out-of-band solution, the originating and terminating offices must both be customers of that vendor. If they aren't, it doesn't do much. and major carriers are not deploying that solution as it is not standards-based. So I guess there's two parts to this. One is an answer to the question about the out-of-band signaling, and the other is how is that related to the rest of this conversation?
Yep. No, and that's a good question, because one of the requirements, one of the early FCC orders was that you have to either be part of a group that's participating in a solution to solve the TDM problem for STIR/SHAKEN. So I personally attend many of the ADIS standard bodies meetings, along with several people from other people from Ribbon and our CTO office. And there is a non-IP task force that's been in place pretty much since the beginning of the year, where we're specifically looking at solving STIR/SHAKEN for TDM networks. There are currently multiple proposed solutions in ADIS. None of them have been completely standardized, and certainly none of them have been adopted by the network. One of those is an out-of-band solution, where the originating provider places that certificate in a repository, the terminating provider retrieves that certificate. Today, that's only a proprietary solution, and only if the originating and terminating providers both subscribe to the same STIR/SHAKEN provider does that work. I personally don't see the large operators implementing that solution because they've invested so much in the traditional STIR/SHAKEN. So unless they're forced to by FCC mandate, I don't see that happening. There's a second solution that's going through the ADIS body, and one that Ribbon has been a supporter of, and that is to embed the STIR/SHAKEN information into the ISUP signaling messages. In ISUP, there was a method for authenticating the DID and saying where that came from back in the early days. No one ever used that, and we're a proponent of leveraging that capability so that customers don't have to spend a lot of money upgrading solutions to support TDM, because we all know that that's eventually going away.
So, Bridget, here's a question. It's rather long, and I will paraphrase it, but I think it's a nuance that's worth going into. So the question that came in, the person went into the Robocall Mitigation database external filing instructions, which again give, as you've said already, those three choices. And they're indicating for option one, which is complete STIR/SHAKEN implementation, there does not seem to be any additional requirement. It says if you select option 2 or 3, a document must be uploaded explaining your specific reasonable steps taken to avoid originating illegal robocall traffic. So it doesn't appear, based on this question, that if you select option 1, you need to do more work. And the bottom line question is, so do we need an RMP filed if we are completely STIR/SHAKEN enabled?
My interpretation is once you select option 1 and you submit it, then your company will be listed in the RMP portal as STIR/SHAKEN compliant, and that in essence is your RMP reporting to the FCC. It will allow and make sure that those intermediate and terminating carriers will continue to accept your traffic. And then again, my interpretation is that is your RMP. You are STIR/SHAKEN compliant. You are signing your calls in the caller authentication protocol.
Okay. Again, Bridget, one more for you. I have an email from the FCC stating I don't need to have it. I presume that is referencing STIR/SHAKEN, in effect until June 30th, 2023, because we are a small service provider. Is that accurate?
As a small service provider, you are under the extension for implementing STIR/SHAKEN until June 30th of 2023. However, you still have to implement a RMP, and you have to file it in the RMP portal.
Okay. As an originator, and I'm going to try and make sure I can interpret this question. As an originator of legit robocalls, for example, appointment notices, pharmacies, etc., is STIR/SHAKEN implementation the primary requirement to be addressed from these orders? I'm not exactly sure who they're asking this question of, like.
So, and let me, maybe I'll take a stab at this, Dan. And I have a lot of customers that are call center companies. Their business is being a legitimate call center. right? And one of the better things that they can do is to work with their service providers to properly attest and sign their outbound calls that are legitimate, because at the end of the day, we all want legitimate calls to be able to get through, and we want to filter out the illegal ones. So certainly I would encourage you, if you are an enterprise with a call center generating legitimate traffic, that you work with your service provider to make sure that your contract is in place, that they understand you're generating traffic, and that those calls get signed appropriately. And certainly StirShaken will help with that, because StirShaken is attesting that you're using valid numbers. However, analytics that a lot of the intermediary as well as terminating providers are using are looking at those numbers, looking at call answer rates, and you probably will still get marked as a robocaller by a lot of those terminating analytics platforms. Hopefully you won't get marked as an illegal or be tagged as an illegal caller, right, and blocked.
Excellent. So there's a question that I don't believe has a finite answer, nothing that I've seen so far, but it says, how long are we required to go back in history and look at a call? Have either of you seen any information on the rulings requiring any time duration? I have not.
I've not, and that's a good question. So certainly, as Bridget, you've worked in some traceback requests, and in the past they could take a year, right, to go through. So I think it's reasonable to assume you'll be expected to have a year's worth of call data to be able to go back through.
I'll raise one point there. Is in the December 2020 order, which this item is not effective yet, but there is a requirement by the FCC in that order that if you are terminating carrier blocking traffic, you will have to keep records back to at least 28 days, because customers will be able to reach out to you and obtain a free of charge report of numbers that have been blocked from terminating to their telephone number. So if the question's alluding to that, it is not effective yet. The FCC has that date in the order as indefinite, which means usually once it's posted in a Federal Register, that requirement will be effective likely within 30 days. But for right now, there is not an effective time frame. I would say if you're looking at keeping records, just watch out for when that date is issued by the FCC, and then you'll know you need to start keeping those records for at least 28 days.
All right, excellent. So there are still more questions. We're out of time, so we will be following up with people and getting back to them with answers. And with that, Lance, let me turn it back to you for whatever you're going to final close with.
All right. Thank you, Dan. Yeah, a lot of questions. Appreciate all the interaction and appreciate your questions coming in. We will certainly follow up with all of you. You can expect an email later today with a link to the replay of the webinar. We've had a lot of people ask about that, as well as a copy of the slides. As you can see on screen, Jamie has contact information there. Feel free to reach out. And if you didn't get your question answered verbally or via the chat, somebody will be reaching out to you to get those questions answered. Thank you again for your time. Again, look for those emails. If you want to reply to that email, we get those immediately to our group, so we can answer those that way as well. But thank you for your time. Look for those emails later today, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, Bridget. Thank you, Dan and Elizabeth. Take care. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.